What's going on, trail and ultra runners? Welcome to another episode of the KoopCast, a podcast where we explore all areas of ultra running, including training, racing, nutrition, physiology, psychology, as well as have a little bit of fun banter along the way. And those last two areas of psychology and fun banter, we have got in spades for you on this episode of the podcast. With me today is none other than Kristin Keim, who's a sports psychologist out of Newberry, South Carolina, and she has one of the more renowned practices in sports psychology today that consists of all different types of endurance athletes, cyclists, triathletes, runners, and MMA fighters. In particular, she works with many of the country's best female cyclists, many of whom we mention by name throughout the course of this podcast. We also discuss her modus operandi, which is happy racers go faster, which not only reflects her own innate positivity, but also her relentless pursuit to get the most out of the athletes she works with by centering on a philosophy that the person is first. Kristin's practice blends her academic background in clinical psychology with her personal background as a former national caliber cyclist, and you'll definitely feel that theme of an athlete who has been there and done that, fused with a practitioner that wants to do the same with her athletes. I caught Kristin right after she presented to our coaching group, and we bring some of those lessons into this conversation on how athletes should focus internally, how they can go about building a village, and how happiness and fiery competitiveness can in fact coexist. We also spent some time going over how ultra running is this fantastic case study in mental fortitude and specific strategies on how to prevent the dreaded DNF. I think regardless of the kind of endurance athlete you are, ultra runner, cyclist, you will gain valuable insight into how to step up your mental game. Kristin's outgoing, pull no punches, and insightful demeanor is infectious, right down to her very laugh that's punctuated by her subtle and, dare I say, beautiful southern drawl. And I must warn you, there's a sprinkle of salty language interspersed in this podcast, so consider yourself forewarned. Let's get right into it. Here's my conversation with sports psychologist Kristin Keim. First off, I appreciate what you did for the coaches the other day. They found that really insightful and
oh, good. I hope that's when I'm like, what the hell did I just talk about?
Well, it's funny because I'm always brought back to this fact that when I was going through a lot of my initial coach training, there was a very heavy physiology basis to that. And there wasn't a formal system for it. First off, I mean, there's not there are very few coaching degrees out there.
Exactly. Yes.
And they're starting to emerge more and more and more in
but
a
they're
university
very different
setting.
even that, because a lot of them, I know University of Washington has one now, but it's very scaled towards team sports, like football and stuff like that, not endurance, which is different, completely different. Because you need to be a sports physiologist and a coach. It's the problem.
Yeah, but those didn't exist with very, very rare exceptions when I started to get into coaching. And so as like a byproduct of that, I had to kind of seek out how to get education, and it was a combination of certifications, which are primarily driven by the national governing bodies, so USA Cycling and USA Triathlon and USA Track and Field, mentorship that I could get from our own coaching group.
Yes,
in our own coaching group, and that's huge. In our own coaching group, they all have exercise science degrees and things like that. So that's kind of like their lens that they look through. And so as a byproduct of that, it's very exercise science and physiology oriented. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something like that, I started to just recognize that I had this huge hole in my game with sports psychology, because I'd never taken it in school. It hadn't been overtly reinforced in any of those, certifications or any of the mentorship, anything like that. There's a little bit of it, but not a whole lot.
Right.
And so I started to seek out, ways to kind of like round that game out. And that goes on for forever, because once you're behind the 8 ball, I've been a coach for 10 years. Right. I've split my career, my 20-year career in half.
Yeah.
Been coaching for 10 years and I'm like, oh crap, I've got this big hole in my game. I'm going to fix it. I'm still always going to be like deficient in that. So whenever we bring in sports psych people to help our coaches up their game, I always feel like I get like an extra dose of education. So I'm very appreciative that you could come in and do that.
And for me, I'm just like, it's that. I mean, those questions were fantastic, like I said, because it already shows probably the more of the human side in sports psych. And what is sports psych? I mean, I think that's another piece that we go down. It's like, I got my master's in sports psych, but most of my work comes from my doctorate in clinical. Like I'm very more, instead of psychopathology, which I think when I was working just as a psychologist, but getting my master's in sports psych helped me as a psychologist in a hospital that I had different than my colleagues, right? Because I was going in not looking at how do I diagnose you, what medicine. I went in like, okay, what are your strengths? Even if you're a drug addict, you still have strengths, So, and I think that's, when I was in my master's program, I had a professor who just, took me aside literally and was like, I think you probably want to work with like Olympic high level athletes, because I was myself and she knew that. And she's like, to do that, she's just blunt. She's like, you're going to have to get your doctorate. Like, this is not going to be just what the master's program can teach you. But it also opened up doors where you have more opportunity to help people. But you're going to have to do a lot more work.
And I've always appreciated the practice that you've built up, because it's been an interesting one. It's been interesting to observe from afar, because it's hard to promote the athletes that you work with because of the work that you're doing. Like when we're a coach, like that proposition is just a whole lot easier.
It is.
We can say, listen, I work with so-and-so athletes. There's a little bit of appeal to authority there.
Exactly.
Other people look at that and, there's a snowball effect. But with the work that you do, that has to explicitly come from the athlete.
Exactly. Yes.
And
yes. And even then I don't really, I've actually backed away from, like I used to share. So like if the only times I'll share usually is like Kate Courtney won worlds. Well, I'm not going to share that. I was there, but then I had athlete, who might've also medaled, so it's just that weird, it sometimes becomes uncomfortable, but what the best thing to do is just the elephant in the room, talk about it. Like, was that okay? Just like, how did you feel? And I think it's just humanizing it, but it is a lot trickier. It really, really, really is. And, but at the same time, what I'm working on doing is not having it be, I want it, not to say it's just like coaching, but a lot of the reasons why maybe people don't want to is they don't want people to know they're working with a sports psychologist. I want it to be like, well, I have no issues talking about, who my nutritionist is and my coach is, and I feel just as comfortable who my mental training or sports psychologist is. Just like my doctor is so-and-so and my psychologist is so-and-so, my psychiatrist is so-and-so.
But that's what I've been so appreciative of is the athletes that you work with have been very open and honest about the fact that they are working with you. And that hasn't always been the case. It still is somewhat like taboo.
It is. Yeah, totally.
For a high level athlete to work with somebody in the sports psych realm, because there's a little bit of like, weakness associated with it or whatever.
Totally. There's still the biases.
Yeah. And make no doubt about it. I mean, you work with the best of the best. And if anything,
I have for like 10, 11 years.
I know. So it's, so anyway, I'm just really appreciative.
My first client was, because it's funny, my first client wasn't, and then went on to like literally be the best in the world, like the first American ever to be out of men and women, in like the world tour. Right. So, but that also took that athlete 10 plus years to get there.
Right. There's no magic fix. We're gonna talk about there's no magic fix, because I'm sure that's something that you run across with the athletes that you encounter.
I don't have fairy dust is what I say.
So let's set the table first with like your framework. And I like to start to peel back the onion layers on people's mantras, because I think it reveals a lot about how they view the world and how they view their professional practice. Yours is happy racers go faster.
It is, and it's still on the t-shirts, but it definitely hasn't. I'd say like 2018, 2019, it really robusted and it fully clarified, but it wasn't me. It was when I was working at Highland Hospital doing my pre-doc, and in that I was working with in a pain clinic where a high significant amount of my clients were actually borderline personality disorder, and I was also working in neuropsych where I was doing robust 10-hour neuropsych tests that took me 3 weeks to write up, but I also was trying to still keep my head in sports psychology and keeping one arm in there, because I didn't want to close the door and get trapped, which a lot of my colleagues did. They just went full clinical, and don't really have any sports psych piece to their practice. And I just knew, I was like, no, I want to be a sports psychologist. Like, I want to work with athletes. And what I learned out of it was I wanted to actually work with people that wanted to get help. And a lot of times when you work clinical or in a hospital, these aren't people coming to you because they really want to change, right. And most athletes, at least if I feel like it's going to be a good fit, I can tell that they're willing to do the work, because it's not just sitting here talking to me like you could to your best friend, right? There's going to be homework. It's training in a way, so, but I was working with Megan Garnier. I can talk, share about that. She's retired, but and 2 other athletes who had just hurt. So I was still riding. I couldn't race, but I still had my foot in with like Catherine Curry Matee, like all these pro women and men friends of mine in the Bay Area that I'd trained with, and I still could ride with. Like, I was hanging on the group rides and stuff, but I had to in a way because I just had to keep the network,
right.
And I had to keep me in that performance. And so, I was working with her and another athlete who's one of the best, I think, made Olympic long team, who was just like a little junior kid, was one of my first clients. And then some of the guys on the California men's pro team, Giant, Cal Giant. So, U23, some of the best. And so I think like 5 or 6, but they were all like either junior XYZ champion. Megan was on, I think at that time, it's now 2020. One of those first teams, and then went on to do TIPCO, here in America before going over full time in Europe. And one of the guy athletes suffered from a little bit of a depression, and I was already clinically trained, so we were kind of just working a little bit through that. And he just like wrote an email one day to me, and he's like, yep. He's like, just like you always say, Dr. Keim, happy race, just go faster. And he was just kind of summarizing kind of the lens that we were working on with through his kind of depression. And the marketing me was just like, and that was just when hashtags were being created, right? So, yeah. And so and I knew that was going to be a big thing, just like that, and I was on the Twitter. I was already on, there was no Instagram. Right. So it was just like Twitter. Instagram was just about to happen, I think. And so that's where it came from. And it did. He was really able to encapsulate that for me, it was it. I was like, that feels like me, that sounds like me. And it was kind of a joke too, like just trying to make the heaviness lighter, but in a day, scientifically, if no matter how much work you do to be optimally to perform optimally, whether it's at work or trying to win the Giro Rosa or the Giro d'Italia, and what we've learned, unlike what some people have proven about racing from anger and like negative, you're going to consistently do better if you are in a better headspace in a story.
Well, so there's an efficacious nature to it. Absolutely. Like happy racers go faster. There's efficacy to that, but it also like encapsulates what you were actually doing. Like you were actually trying to bring out at that point in time, very high level cyclists, their happiness, for lack of a better word.
Exactly. It is. No, and it is. And I think that it's not making it like dumbifying it. Like, you know, believe me, not every day is going to be happy. And, you know, I've helped people, you know, who cried every day of a Grand Tour and still won it. You know, I mean, it's just able to say like, all right, let's take a breath. And yes, there's still negative. There's still a lot of pressure, but we're going to focus right here, right now on what's in your control. You know, and so all these things are part of happy racers go faster. And if you're not enjoying it, even though it is hard, but you can be able to like, you know, I can get someone to just hit reset for a second. Doesn't mean you're not emotional, but it's just bringing it back to like the meaning and purpose and humility and all these things over the last, you know, 10 plus years that I have hopefully tried to help a generation almost now of athletes and the endurance world understand that happy racers go faster. And then to be a happy whole physiology, mind, spirit, you've got to be, you know, rested, and you've got to understand the you know, the efficacy that to be happy, you need to rest and have a social life, and, you know, not be tunnel vision, dogmated, overtrained with no social life, you know, because that's not going to lead to happiness, obviously. 100%. And happy human, happy athlete.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You kind of brushed over this aspect that I want to dig into a little bit more. And this is like this concept of training or racing to like prove something or out of anger. And a lot of athletes out there are going to identify with that psychology very specifically because of the 2 ESPN documentaries that just came out in May. One of them was with Michael Jordan, the best, one of the best, doesn't matter how you slice it,
he
ever.
Looked miserable.
Yeah.
Miserable his whole career. Lindsey Vonn's is the same way.
Yeah.
If you saw her documentary, I just felt sorry for her the whole time. I was like, she would have quit a long time ago. She was miserable, right? I mean, I'm serious. And now that's happening to Michaela Schifrin.
Yeah.
You know, and Michael Phelps, Misty Franklin.
But we're gonna so this brings up a more important thing. So most athletes are they're going to be in touch with those things. There's this one documentary with Michael Jordan. There's another one with Lance Armstrong. You can totally mention Lance Armstrong. I don't have an issue with that.
Okay,
it's that's not taboo here at all. But I could tell you what I really think if that ever comes up as well. But what I want to kind of like get from you is you see this behavior and you see this psychology in elite athletes kind of like lauded to a certain extent, meaning that it's put out there in the public and people view it as a reason why they were great. You then have to go back into your practice with your athletes having seen these things or heard of them or whatever, and have to then work with them on that. Like, how does that all unfold? Because you just mentioned it is this unhealthy behavior that we should start to steer people away towards. Yet we still have all of these examples of some of the best that can win. We'll throw away their, you know, what they're doing personally and things like that.
Right.
But they can still win races.
They're still winning.
They're still winning with that type of psychology. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes down to the consistency piece, you know, and even though it was out of the anger, they weren't angry the entire time, right? So you might get a few good results out of yourself. And, you know, the Michael Jordan one was really fascinating because, you know, I do think that, I don't think he was miserable his whole entire career. I think he was, you know, a lot of it's the psychology of the other players too. I call it the Voss effect. I think a lot of, you know, Marianne Voss, I'm not taking away that she was an amazing athlete, but I do think I don't think she was that much more, except for the fact that she got really good, and then you as an athlete just think that she's going to beat you, you know? So I think there was the Michael Jordan effect, the Lance effect, whatever you want to say. So there's that piece that often is not noted, is how much of, you know, of greatness is also because other people let them be where they are, you know, too. And so it's more complicated than a straight up answer. But I do get sometimes, you know, should I be racing from like more hardcore, you know, and then I just look at them and I start laughing because they're like kittens, really, you know? I'm like, no, you don't need to be a lion, except for, so I have one good example. I have an athlete and she's very, been working with her for 6-7 years now, but very engineer, very, you know, going to think about data, very, you know, just intellectual, not very emotional. I mean, you know, for a woman, you know, she's anti most of the things and more of on the side of what, you know, maybe the traits of a male athlete, pro athlete. She uses lots of engineers and guys like that, right? But I finally tapped into like this part of her that's like, and so one day she's, you know, we're trying to get more excitement and fire and like this I want to beat people. So I've had to work a lot on that with men and women of, okay, it's cool to be a domestique. It's cool to be like in the top 15, but your coach is telling me that your numbers and everything say you should be top 5. What's missing? And it's different to go out there and be vulnerable and figure out what is your internal locus of control for driving to push yourself. Because the minute you're thinking about the other person, they're dictating your competition, right? So I think Michael Jordan and, you know, even Lance those two, they were just so about them. They weren't worried about beating other people. They might have said that, but really they were just able to really harness that internal drive, whether that's from, you know, we could always say it like, you know, Floyd Landis, I mean, Tyler, any of these people, like, not to say what they did was right by any means, but also what happened in their backgrounds that led to them maybe making not the best choices, right? With anyone, athletes, I mean, most top athletes, how I like to say it in a kind way, because I put myself there, we're not normal. Because most people would not ever want to go and put themselves in that level of pain, right? So we all kind of have some void, you know, I'm not Freudian, I'm very behavioral, cognitive behavior and all that, but, you know, there is part of something we're trying to prove. And most of the time we're just trying to prove something to ourselves. It's not necessarily about the external. That's when it's healthy. It's when it's the external, and that's where that like, I'm angry and I'm going to like, you know, whatever. If you're able to internalize it, maybe you get a few good races out of it. But at the end of the day, it's more of an external control that eventually is going to, you know, bite you in the ass, kind of, as well I look at it. So for me, it's just figuring out who that human is and what their drive is. And even though they may not be, you know, a very emotional person, going back to this one example, you know, one day she was just like, I just want to kill bitches, you know, or something like that. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's like, who is this person? Like, I even felt like I could cuss now with this person, right? Like, and so on the back of the number, we put like KB, you know, just some like that reminded themselves that like, I am here to go and bury myself and that this should hurt worse than, you know, my training. You know what I'm saying? So finding that fight in themselves, but it doesn't have to be this like this, I hate people and I want to fucking like prove something to someone else because you will, I'll just say it, like, I wouldn't be a good fit for an athlete like that, but I can promise you, even though they might be winning, they're not happy.
Sure.
There's a difference.
But what I was kind of teasing out of a little bit of that dialogue is that happiness and like an internal sense of competitiveness or a desire to succeed, those two things can coexist. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Right. Like, you can be happy with the things that you're doing if you're reflective upon them from an internal perspective, if they have meaning to you.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad I kind of understood that correctly.
Yeah, totally. It's all about the internals. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of, I mean, that's going back to the sport, evidence-based research in sports psychology, that, you know, that internal drive and that internal like meaning and purpose is all, you know, is always going to, because I do get that question, like, do I need to be more, you know, whatever. And I just laugh. I was like, the minute you say that you need to be something is probably what you don't need to be.
100%. You
just need to be you, and we'll find it and we'll figure out, you know, for one example, a good example is Kate Courtney. Like, her big thing is sparkle and joy and happy. That doesn't mean she's not out there to kill and to dominate, because you don't win world championships. You know, but again, if people go back and watch her world championship, she wasn't worried about Annika. She had her head down. She was just going.
Yeah.
She was like, I'm in pain and I'm keeping on this tempo. And she had raced the race right for her. Instead of like attacking on those heels and stuff, she would get dropped, but she was keeping, you know, her level of what she knew, numbers she knew she could do. And it just goes back to what she knew she could do. And did she know that she could win worlds? It wasn't that she didn't think she was, but she didn't have the pressure to think she had to.
Yeah.
You know, which is a lot different too.
Yeah, and once again, the common theme is like the internal focus. Like, she
100%.
knew what she could do. She knew, you know, her strengths and weaknesses and things like that. And she's trying to like maximize that as much as possible. And at the end of the day, she won.
Right.
And for the listeners out there, some of our listeners are going to be
more runners.
They're going to be like highly engrossed in ultra running and only ultra running. We're talking about the reigning.
Well, but it's good for every sport to look. So I have like my downhillers is a great example. I have a downhiller who wants to, when COVID's over next time, he wants to spend a whole winter with this U.S. ski team.
Oh gosh.
Downhill ski team. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, all my athletes, I get them to look at other sports, MMA or whatever. So runners, you're going to hear a little bit more cycling today.
Well, I wanted to set the reference of who the athlete was that we were talking about is the reigning mountain bike.
Look them up.
No,
she's not reigning.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Mountain bike world champion Kate Courtney.
Yes.
Okay.
2018. Yeah.
Who, in my professional opinion, can save cycling. Because cycling needs saving, but that's another conversation.
Saving it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll leave that for another discussion.
Time.
That's definitely another time. You and I have this really common piece of framework, and the listeners to this podcast and our coaches, now that I'm thinking about this a little bit more, our coaches will completely profess to this, is that we go through great lengths to make sure that we have a common language. And so when in our coaching world, when I say tempo run, our coaches know exactly what intensity it's at, exactly what the framework of the interval should be. I
probably know what it is.
Exactly. But you do the same thing with your athletes. Like you make sure that you and the athlete are on the same page from a vocabulary perspective. Yep. And there's kind of a couple examples that I want to go through that I think are really intriguing. The first one of which is goals versus objectives. And then the second one that I've heard you talk about a lot is balance versus energy management. So why don't you...
energy management versus time management, which is the same thing as balance.
Totally. So why don't you like take us through that and why that commonality is so important to have?
Well, I mean, actually, when I was working on my master's, and one summer, it was like literally the worst summer of my life up until now. And I say that like that was what my therapist at the time, because it's funny, people are like, I just talk about my therapist, and I tell people, I'm like, I don't think I'd want to go to a therapist who had never been to a therapist, to kind of understand like what's it like on the other side. But they make us in our doctorate programs go to therapy. And she, I was talking about, I was doing this paper on goal setting, like a intense literature review, like mini like thesis. And it was the best thing ever, because in it I found all these different ways that other sports psychologists had gotten away from the word goal. And I just felt like it was getting trivialized. And so one day when I was writing it, I just thought about it like from the lens of kind of how from my dance education. And I remember just, I was a, high level competitive athlete, like tennis and soccer. And I was thinking about what's a common theme against some of these things? Because in dance, you don't really have goals.
Right.
I mean, it's not like a sport like that, but we definitely had like daily objectives of like, what am I working on today that's going to make me a better dancer? Okay, I'm working on my turnout today. And so it was just kind of came up like out of just, magically appear, where I was just like, I like that word objective. So I just started using it in that, kind of report, in my literature review report, as of other ways. And so, blueprint's been one that's been used. Blueprint and objectives were the two. There's some other ones that I think still just, kind of at the end of the day, goals sounds better. And I don't not say goal, because sometimes the language is just easier to say, goal. But most of my athletes who've been working with me, they get indoctrined and they even say it. So we just don't ever really say in the Keim household of sports psychology goals, but like, it's not that they're different. I think it's an objective sometimes. I feel like it got so trivialized with the goal setting that I think it took away the importance. Does that make sense? Because of the word, because it's just everywhere. And, just like, the fads of language. And so I think sometimes our receptors and our brains just need something, how I like to say, kind of sexy, just something different. And so that's been my job, is to kind of just create my own language with these performance things, whether it's objectives. So most of the time what I'll have athletes do is like create, like in the middle, it's like it's a vision board is what it's called. And, Kate Courtney's like, some of hers are like incredible. And I have one athlete, she like is an amazing artist. And so she just draws like these mountains and then interweaves hers, and some do it like a collage. So I tell them you can't fail at your vision board. But it is a fun way for, even if you're a 30-year-old, to do something handsy, crafty, and think about it. But at the end of the day, it's just creating kind of realistic and timely, all the kind of the basics of goals, right? In a something that you can see visually versus just in your head. And some don't like to do that, but I still make them journal and like do the, objectives. What is your coach wanting you to do? What do you want to do? And if they don't do it, then they don't do it. But the ones that do it, who listen to me and do what I say, they get better a little faster.
Well, because it's clear what the purpose is.
Yes, thank you. And then when the more
you can say that a little louder if you want to agree with me.
Your purpose. Why the fuck are you out there running at 100 degrees doing tempo or whatever, right? Like, and then some days you just need to go out there and do your trainings. Like, I get that. Like, just get it done, and it doesn't, it's not gonna be all pretty, but something's going on in your life, then you probably shouldn't be training if that's becomes more the norm. You're just doing the training. You're not intrinsically going to have that. Your muscles, your body doesn't sense that. And it's junk miles. If your brain is not connected to your legs or your heart or your soul, and I hate to get woo-woo, but that's the reality of what this is, really, goals, is you are taking this on versus, someone telling you to do it. Yeah, you might get good, and you might even be the best in the world, but who cares if you weren't happy?
Yeah. You started to get into some of like the process that you use when you're working with athletes, and there are going to be a lot of people that are listening to this that are elite athletes, but more commonly they're just going to be what we commonly call age group athletes or everyday athletes.
Yeah.
But the process can be remarkably similar, whether it's physical training, which is kind of more my world, or mental training, which is predominantly your world. And I think one of like the common themes with it is you have to like meet people where they're at. We would never have an athlete that, that runs 40 minutes for a 10K, all of a sudden have them do 5-minute per mile repeats out on the track, because they're not at that level of fitness. Right. And same thing in your world, like you're developing tools and skills and awareness in a certain framework so that they can essentially catch on. So how do they, like, how does that start? Like, how does an athlete who's out there says, okay, I want to work on my mental game? Like, what are the like fundamental building blocks that they can work on just to start out with if they have no exposure to this in the first place?
Well, I mean, if they're working with a coach, you know, first off, you know, I think a coach sometimes, like my job with some of my top athletes becomes more of like the account manager, you know, so
I like that.
It is, which, you know, you can only have so many top level athletes when you're the account manager, you know. But even for them, some of them came to me with no dialogue. But they didn't really know what they wanted. Like most don't. A lot of people don't. Either they're injured and they, you know, are in crisis, or they're you know, undiagnosed OTS, overtraining syndrome, whatever you want to call it, burnout, same thing to me. You know, they're underperforming. I mean, there's these things why, but a lot of people don't have the language. And you know, for me, I think the first thing would be go like listen to a sports psychologist on a podcast. Go and check out a sports psychologist's website. Read some of their articles. You know, I have a list of books that I always recommend that aren't really like, this is sports psychology, right? But they are where the athletes are going to be introduced of like what human behavior and how that impacts us. And sometimes, you know, you can just, you know, email a sports psychologist, set up an intake call, and also just see what it's about. And I think that's kind of, you know, the first step is we're not scary, and I'm not going to be a good fit for everyone. And I am old enough and mature enough to typically know that. And if I look an athlete up, you know, I'm either going to be like, whoa, that's just, I don't know that sport. I don't have time to learn that sport, you know, but I can direct them towards maybe a sports psychologist that's their niche. Though I'm kind of against that too. Just like, yes, I'm a, you know, sports psychologist in the framework that people think I'm a cyclist, but like most people don't realize I was a high level dancer, but I've also played tennis and soccer and, you know, all these other sports. And I'm interested in other sports besides just, you know, the endurance athletes, but that I am I hate that word expert, but that's more my expertise is endurance athletes. And I think it's just that, and bringing it up with your coach and have a dialogue. So what's, you know, it's not the coach is not doing something wrong. It's just sort of like, hey, like, how can I, you know, up my mental game? Or, you know, I'm having some anxiety, coach. And then it's just like, oh, okay, well, you know, let's talk about it, having a dialogue. And then the coach and the athlete realizing like, okay, what are some resources before, you know, you go to a sports psychologist? And I think it's just like seeing if there's some books on it. You know, just, it's not scary. So, you know, there's no perfect way. But I think the best way is just, you know, go to the Applied Sports Psychology, Association of Applied Sports Psychology, ask their, they actually have a little area where you can type in, you know, where you live. Now, this is what gets complicated, though, with my high-level athletes. Like, who the heck is going to... Newberry, South Carolina is not going to have some sports psychologists for me to see, right? So I'm kind of, you know, but if you're on a break or you're a runner who does spend a significant time in one location, like, you know, in California, or, you know, you might be able to find a sports psychologist who's in Denver or something that you could go to physically. But honestly, the tele with sports psychology is there's no difference. Like, it's not going to be better in person than it is going to be someone you talk over the phone or through Skype. It's about the rapport. It's about that human athlete and me or whoever. That's what it's going to be about. It's more about that relationship, and it's the same for coaching.
I was about to say the exact same thing. We have
really
we have somebody in our coaching group. His name's Dominic, who I've already recorded a podcast with him that's gonna come out in a few weeks. And I go through that whole thing with them, like, how do we match up coaches with athletes? And it's all rapport based. It's not.
It is.
Oh, I have an athlete that's training for the Western States 100. This other coach has done the Western States 100. Yeah, those like technical matches or niceties.
They're nice.
But the necessity is the rapport piece.
Yes.
100%.
And the beauty of social media and being authentic on it, like you are. Like, I love how you're just you. So athletes are going to either like you or not. So then it's already a good fit, right? Because if they're not like jiving with what you're doing, then you're saving everyone time and energy, right? So that's why I'm just me. I'm like, either you like this or not, and and most often I get athletes. It's a snowball effect. So now, coaches, having good coaches who always kind of refer to me, right? But even then, that doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit. It typically is, because usually I'm in unity with the coach. See what I'm saying? So you just kind of that synergy. I call it the village. That's another one of my thing that I started is, it takes a village to raise an athlete. And I think that really has just started to evolve the last 5 years, where athletes realize, to be the best, it's not just having a good coach. You got to have a great nutritionist, a sports psych, a physio, a personal trainer, all that. And I think teams should pay for that. That's a whole nother thing.
Well, that's what I try to do a lot on this podcast, because I realize my own limitations as a coach are confined to, practically what the information that I can absorb. And I can't be an expert in all areas. You just can't be that
person. It'll burn you out.
No.
Right? I think a lot of coaches blur boundaries, not meaning to do it in a mean way, but that hinders that relationship of coach and athlete, because the coach becomes the everything, talking about the divorce they're going through or whatever. It's not that you don't talk about it, but you can't be their therapist about it,
Coaches the analogy that I've always used is coaches are the very proverbially the jack of all trades and masters of none. And we have to be, because we have to use psychology and physiology and tactics and even equipment. Even we have to have.
But I do all that too.
Yeah, it's tough.
You don't know how many times I have to ask athletes, when's the last time you got a good bike fit? And it was a game changer. Or nutrition is the biggest one.
Yeah.
I have this one athlete, and I can't. He hasn't really talked about working with me, but he drives me crazy because he is the quintessential poster child. And I've had a few athletes where I've gotten them to work with nutritionists, and I'm not going to say they quit me because of that, but they got so much better because they finally were focusing on their nutrition. They're like, well, I don't need sports psych now. Actually, you do, but if you don't want to work with me, then it's probably not a good fit. You see what I'm saying? So it's all right. But I got them that nutritionist, right? So because I knew it was clear and day, I was like, I don't think you're eating enough during your racing. And I just don't think you're, and I can't, I'm not your nutritionist. I can't tell you what macro might, and the minute they get someone that they buy into because they've worked with so many athletes, and then their performance gets better. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you do need to eat during a race. Hello.
Yeah. I've always found that the practitioners that have a specialty, so in your area, right, it'd be psychology, but can also kind of bleed out of their specialty to a certain extent. Those are always the ones that end up doing the best job, because they're not so focused in this specific silo. The ones that drive me crazy are the really narrowly specific sports scientists that if you get them, they're brilliant within their little area, biomechanics or nutrition.
And it's very micro.
Exactly. So I typically don't refer athletes to that one person. I bring I'm the filter.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole too much though. You mentioned this really cool thing, it takes a village. And I agree with you. We are starting to see this a lot more in elite sport, and almost to the point where you can probably find a few cases where the village is too big.
Too big. Too many cooks in the kitchen.
So
yes, and I've actually had that help athletes shave some people out and off, and it's hard, but definitely. Oh yeah.
So what does Kristin's ideal village look like?
I think it takes time. I think at some point I'm going to be more heavily involved with an athlete, and the other times the athlete is really going to just lean on their coach and may not need me as much because they're just in a good place, and it's good to talk about what's going right. But my job is to I'm not here to keep you having to keep coming to me. I want you to have your little wings and jump off and fly, but know that I'm always there. Because I have athletes that I've worked with, and I may not see them for 5 years, and all of a sudden they email me, and they're like, can I work with you again? And I'm like, yeah, like I didn't say like, oh, she doesn't work with me or he doesn't work with me anymore. I'm like, hell yeah, dude. And we'll jump right back in. Right. And they're uncomfortable. And I'm like, no, like I don't take it personal. You know, and that's just a, you know, I guess I'm blessed with that lens that, you know, I've really always understood not to take things personal, that it's more about the other person than me. And that's just trainings of a psychology and being a psychologist and going through therapy, right? So I might be disappointed or a little bit hurt, but I know it has nothing to do with like the quality of my work, you know? And so the village is going to start with, you know, the ground, the first thing is a good coach. I mean, I you know, no offense, a coach might send an athlete to me, and then I, through a few sessions, and sometimes even the first session, I can be like, oh, this is a bad match. Or this is toxic.
Between you like, and the athlete or the coach and the athlete?
Oh, the coach and the athlete.
Yeah.
Like not good.
Yeah.
Like this is the problem. Yeah. Like the coach is sending the athlete to me when really they're the problem. The relationship's the problem. So I get them to work on getting them to leave and find a new coach. So that's it. It's like the basics is going to be fundamentally you have to have a good coach, one that you believe in, one that's like just, you know, that you believe in, that you feel like you're getting good workout. You understand that the coach has a vision for you, that the coach also has things that they feel like you should, in a way. I hate the shoulds and the woulds and the coulds, but they have at least a vision. You know, they're not just plopping you into this cookie cutter program where you're trying to win Kona, but yet you find out that you're doing the same training as their weekend racers. Yeah. You know, which I literally just, have had a lot of that kind of stuff happening.
It's weird that you see that so much, though.
Like, I do so much.
Always
it's really sad.
I mean,
it's really toxic. It's really bad.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it over the course of my coaching career too, and I've always had this idealistic notion that eventually that's just going to get weeded out, but apparently it hasn't, and I don't know why.
People get lazy, and people are getting it for money, and you know, maybe they had 3 kids now. I mean, I'm not saying they're bad people, but they're definitely not a good fit for my athletes, and that's all I'm here to protect.
Okay, so this village concept, like the centerpiece is the athlete, obviously. The
athlete's in the middle, and then what I like to have them do is look at the coaching relationship, the coach, kind of like the training. So, you know, the training physically and the goals and objectives for the physical part, like this winter we're going to work on increasing your whatever, or like for, you know, a good example for Kate, it's not like any coach or athlete listening to this, I don't think this is like opening up, you know, Pandora's box, but like she's still very young and is competing against athletes who've been racing for like 15 years. So there's still some things fundamentally for her to still be good in 5 or 10 years, right? That she has to work on. So that's why I hate when athletes compare, because, you know, an athlete who might be in their 30s, late 30s or mid 30s is not going to be the same, doing the same trainings that someone in their early 20s is doing, you know? So it's really important that you know, kind of just get a coach that you believe in, and you just kind of focus on the physical aspect, and then, you know, then it's nutrition. So then, you know, are you working on your nutrition in a good way? Not like, you know, I do get eating disorders and stuff like that. And if anyone has a significant eating disorder, then they shouldn't be competing. They shouldn't be training. Like, they just need to be working on that. And that's not my expertise. People who have a previous history of having an eating disorder, it never goes away. So that's something to teach someone right there. I've actually had athletes go on and be like, well, you know, when I got over my eating disorder, like it just went away magically. And I'm like, well, I'm cured. No, you're not. And you need to fire and probably go to a different therapist if they said that you were, you know, cured. Because it's going to come up in other ways, in other obsessive ways, and typically unhealthy obsessive ways, whether it's, you know, relationships, sex, drugs, alcohol, spending, exercise, which that's a whole nother one. Exercise addiction, which is, I think, should be in the DSM of psychology. It's not, but it should be. And I've written papers, so people can go on my website. I've written some papers for cycling tips on it and everything. But, so the nutrition, so these are actually areas they write like on their vision board, like 2 or 3 objectives. That's it. Like, what is something in the vision there? What is that? Their family. So like, what does their social network look like? So, and again, I've not even been brought up yet. Right. So there's that physical piece. One day I want the sports site to be with the physical piece. We're just not there yet. So I'm a realist. Right. So then we work on our social. So we're working on our bio, psycho, social, but in sport, it's kind of bio, social, psych piece in a way. Would you, that's just kind of what I've learned to not push and force against, because the more that I get them feeling confident in their coaching and their nutrition and their social network, that's like a beautiful platform for me to be able to teach things that are going to be obtained. Because when someone's in a crisis and it's just like, having panic attacks or deep depression, it's that's just way much harder for me to work, because we have to kind of take those other things out, those variables out.
Yeah, and that's typically the framework that we've worked with as well, where the coach is kind of the linchpin in this whole village analogy, with obviously the athlete's at the center of it.
Right.
But in terms of the village, it's getting built around the athlete. And that's just, it's more... somebody's going to listen to this podcast and say, you're totally biased on that because you are a coach. So of course you think that, that's the most important person. But the reality...
That doesn't mean that's the person that actually is... Do you see, like the coach, like you are gods is how I look at it. You coaches do not understand how much power y'all really have. Like, so, like way more power than I will ever have.
Yeah.
Because like I will tell an athlete something literally 1,000 times, and the minute the coach mentions it once, the athlete comes back and says, so-and-so said, and you know what I say? I'm like, I don't care if it was like the clown at the grocery store, as long as it's in your head now, bravo.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any ego around that. Yeah. Right. But y'all are gods.
And a lot of that, and trust me, I realize that, and in my experience working with athletes.
Just realizing it and sitting with that, but also like you said, like the coach then needs to make sure that everyone is on the same blueprint. Yep. So like the athlete is the center, but the coach now wants to make sure, like, all right, I'm going to make sure that I have a talk once a month with Kristin.
Yep.
I got the nutrition plan in handwriting or whatever from, whatever you're, the athlete, I feel like the athlete should promote that and kind of, I help the athlete be the driver's seat is what I'm trying to eventually get through, but we have to work on it. And so, a really confident, just like really efficacious and autonomous athlete is going to be able to say, I need a rest day on that day, and not feeling comfortable and be like, you now have to work around that. I just don't feel, I'm not feeling it. Yeah. And for whatever reason. Right. You see what I'm saying? So it takes time. And then the other parts of the village are going to be the finances. That is part of it. Right. So the village is not just like these humans. The village is everything that is important and that like keeps this wheel. So you kind of look at the athlete as the hub, right? Then you got the spokes to each thing. Visually, that's what I want my athletes to do. I used to make them kind of create that, and then I just said, do whatever you want to. So, and then having like the inspiration piece. So then, having a good chiro when you come home, right? Having a good acupuncturist when you come home, getting your PT and all these people to give you what to do when you're on the road. It's funny. I think Megan went mommy sharing this example when she was on Rabobank and Boels Dolman, highly Dutch teams. Yep. She had some hip issues. She's just was a sprinter who became a climber, and to do that, you've asking a lot of your body, and she was kind of toning her body to be something to match and be able to race, with maybe a Mara Abbott or something, but she's maybe not built like that and genetically going to have that. So her body, your body just takes a toll, and 10 years of racing at the top level like she did, she was, taped from head to toe. But that was kind of her thing, to get all the tape on versus is it really helping? Right. And like literally in the middle of Joe Rosa, right? Like she's like in the pink jersey. She would do 30 minutes of yoga, before the stage still. But it was like, if she didn't do that, it was like, that's just what she did mentally and physically to be like, I'm ready. Right. But she got her village to kind of like create and help these things. And then if she didn't feel like, if her knee was hurting something, she could just do a quick Skype with her physio from, wherever they were in Italy, right? So at the high end, it gets a little bit, your village gets a little bigger, but then the problem is you get on these teams and then they want you to have this trainer and that person. And so that's when things get a little chaotic and we have to like talk to team managers and just, try to say like, like this athlete just needs these people and this extra is actually making it more challenging.
Okay, let's talk about that because there's going to be athletes that are listening to this podcast. Is like, okay, I've got a coach. I'm going to go find a nutritionist to work with. I'm going to, my family's going to be part of my village. I'm going to have my training partners, the social network that's going to be part of my village. I'm going to look at other athletes and other people to find inspiration.
Totally.
They're going to be part of my
role
village.
Models.
Role models, absolutely. And there does become a point to where this village gets too big and components of it are counterproductive to the objectives.
Yes, they are.
Use your vocabulary, the objectives. And I have seen this play out both in elite sport and with weekend warriors where there are too many people giving them influence
especially when you're
like
female.
Too many directions. Oh, really?
What?
So why is that? Or in your experience?
Oh, yeah. Like, when you could be, my top athletes get that. They'll be riding their bike, in the Bay Area. And, someone will say something about like, oh, like you need to keep it in this gear or I don't know, just something. And then they're in the middle of a training. Like that's their job.
Yeah.
And as a female, it was just like, I think now more women have coaches. It's a little bit more normalized. But when I was racing, it was a really big deal if you were a female that had a coach, but everyone wanted to coach you. Everyone had their 2 cents.
Oh, right.
And a lot of women still really get that a lot, like feedback. I had an athlete one time, they were in like, I think even it might've been Kate, like in a championship jersey and the person didn't really think that they were the champion.
Oh God. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, where did you get that jersey?
Yeah. Did you buy it at the store? Yeah. Did you buy it at the store?
I don't think men I don't think, most men have never had that experience where it's like, did you just buy that?
In those situations, Kristin, do you think that that's coming from the other person going, this person doesn't know what the fuck they're doing versus I really want to help them?
I think it's more of a place of just, not thinking, just thinking like, literally just being impulsive with, let me just sit with the situation. And maybe it was out of something positive, but I think, I would invite men or women to just, keep to yourselves. And, like if someone reaches out from wanting a coach, let someone reach out and ask versus providing without someone really showing interest in it. And, I don't need assistance. You don't need to touch my lower back or touch me. Yeah. How many times in group rides?
No, I
didn't ask to be touched.
I've seen that play out in the cycling world a lot.
You don't see that as much with the men. You see that way more with women. Like I'd much rather get dropped than your hand on my booty.
Okay. Let's.
So there's gender issues to that. So that's a whole nother layer. Yeah. But just to simplify it a little bit, I think you've got to figure out it's your recipe.
Yeah.
And so, you've got to take ownership, whether you're a top level athlete listening to this who might feel like they've got too many cooks in the kitchen. And at the end of the day, it just goes back down to you, your coach, and your sports psychologist, usually the people that really know you and are there for you and your significant other. So like Megan, when we went at Rio, she actually brought over her physio. Mm-hmm. Even though she was with like USAC, it was still like he was part of her village. He got her through a lot. Her husband, obviously, her family, her coach, Corey Hart, and myself.
Yep. I think the takeaway message for the athletes is when you're building out this village, be deliberate with it, and bigger isn't always better.
Yes. Well, and helping athletes have those hard conversations. I mean, I've had athletes stay with coaches for a long time. But didn't mean they didn't think about changing over to what was, the hot coach at the time, right? Or questioning. But any good relationship, you're going to have, like any relationship, your challenge areas.
You got to work. And you got to work at it.
Communication.
Yep. Let's kind of make a hard pivot to ultra running. I've always thought that ultra running is like this beautiful case scenario for sports psychologists, because it's this sport that it's incredibly physically difficult when you're in the races, very long durations, low intensities, and at the same time, it's not very high on the technicality scale. It's not like a mountain bike race where you've got to be like laser-like focused on this, descent, or you're going ass over tea kettle. Not typically the case in most races.
Some are, some are very,
Yeah, but my point with that is there are these, in ultra running, there are these huge spaces of time for an athlete to think.
Yes.
And because of that, one of the things that I've consistently noticed for going out to races, and particularly at the 100-mile distance, is this concept of the mental DNF, where I can sit at an aid station late into the race, 70, 80 miles into the race, and I'll stay there from the time the leaders come through to the time that the last people come through and they shut the aid station down. And the runners that drop out are physically indistinguishable from the runners that continue on. I can't, their gaits are the same, they don't look, they don't physically look like they're under any more or less duress than one another. But yet something is going on where they're like, I can't do it anymore. And the only thing that I can chalk that up to is this long time and space that they have to think about what's going on. So enter your world.
Instead of already going in and having, a script, like a movie, like a performance. You already kind of know what you're going to be facing and what to have in your mental script of what you're going to do over the whatever hour, PR time or whatever you're trying to do.
So is that, so in the sport of ultra running, you've got a lot of tools in your toolkit that you can use, this mental script being one of them. Do you think that's something,
mindfulness, meditation, all that, huge for these sports?
Okay. So for the runners that are out there that, there's no races going on, so it's weird to talk about this. So maybe in 2021, when somebody revisits this podcast, they're in this, they know that they're going to enter this 100-mile, 100K really long race, and they know that they're going to encounter some aspect of the race that's going to require a certain amount of mental fortitude to get out of the aid station.
Which they can work on now, because if they live in a safe space where they can get out and run, not everyone can do this, but you can still practice these things before an actual race. If you're able, maybe you're not doing the distance of the full distance, but these are still things that you still can utilize in longer distances that you might be training.
So let's pick a couple of those out that might be easy for the listeners to kind of grasp hold of. We've already gone through, step one, if you think you want to up your game in this, is let's just go get educated. Pick, lowest common denominator, listen to a podcast, go read an article and things like that. But then step number two is kind of like putting these things in practice. What are the things that the athletes can put in practice on a day-to-day basis to alleviate this really specific situation that I came up, but it can apply to anything, obviously. Totally.
And I think it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of those people probably have visualized too much, what would go wrong. Without saying, okay, these things could go wrong and this is what I'm going to do. And the first is that internal drive that unless, you're bleeding out of your, literally you hurt yourself, or you are, because this is where I have an issue with some of my athletes where they heat exhaustion. They literally could kill themselves. It's just a race. Right. Okay, I'm sorry. So I have the opposite where people keep going when they shouldn't. So I think it's just learning and having kind of ethos of an agreement, that you make with yourself and your coach and, me, that like, no matter what, I'm never going to quit. There's a difference between quitting and giving up. So quitting, it's okay to quit. That means you're injured, you're dehydrated, you didn't eat enough. You just, someone just gave you a message that, someone's sick in your family or, whatever. Or you just knew that you weren't ready at the start line and you decided to start but you knew that you hadn't slept in 2 weeks, that you had been sick and you just came off mono. I mean, just all these stupid reasons like you shouldn't even be at the start line. And if you're at the start line already thinking about what could go wrong, then you should just go and pack your bags because it's not going to end pretty. So that's kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you're, at the start line and you have your good village around you and you have your village of support and you have your objectives for your race and then you hit a hot spot of just like, I'm really in pain. Like this is really hurting. But if I, go, I know how to deal with cramps. I'm going to go, I'm going to eat some bananas. I'm going to take a breather and then I'm just going to go slowly. I'm not going to just go right back into that tempo and I'm just going to keep going and I'll give myself another, 20 minutes, but we go over that. We go over the kind of what could go wrong and then you role play it to yourself. That's kind of the next step. Then you can add in like meditation and mindfulness and these more constructs that for me, unless you just really become a meditator, just because you meditate and you practice mindfulness doesn't mean you're going to obviously be able to get out of these kind of situations, right? You have to be able to know that that the situations happen because you're human, right? Even if you do everything perfect, you could just malfunction in the middle of a race. I've all had that happen. Mechanical malfunction is what could happen with the ultra runner because on any given day you could be really good or really great, really good or really bad, and you just don't ever know really, because we're all human. So I think it's just that also being understanding that you're human, that like shit happens, that your ego is not attached, your self-worth's not attached to the outcome. So as long as some of my athletes, their best races are races like that where they fought and kept climbing, even though they felt like they got dropped, but then everyone else crashes themselves out. You know what I'm saying? And they end up winning. But if they had given up in that moment, right? And Kate's a good example. Like she was not like looking to be winning, right? But she just head down, kept doing her thing, wasn't worried about what anyone else was doing, and then she was able to ride away and get the win. But that's working on that, like knowing, committing, like no matter what, even if I know I can win, as long as I know I'm right now giving my best, I'll be disappointed with second, but like, fuck yeah, I got second. So those things are kind of easier things I think to do, is just to kind of have that ethos of like, no matter what, I'm not going to give up. But it's okay to quit and give myself permission to quit if there's some internal and external thing that is overplaying my willpower. And that's what's different. Your willpower is that ability to suffer through the pain that you should have already been training. So, your training at some point should almost be harder than what you're ever going to race if you have a good coach and if you're at that level to be able to train at that modality. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. I want to go back to like two really specific elements that you brought up and dive into those a little bit more. The first one of which I use this same exercise with my athletes. It's what are you going to do? It's this role playing in advance of the event to kind of flush out some of the situations
doesn't mean it still doesn't suck.
Yeah.
But now you kind of know what it's like, what to expect and what to do if it happens.
But in ultra running, the situations are okay, you get lost. Right?
Yes.
You come into an aid station and you've bonked and you're cramping and there's 5 other, things going on all at the same time. Like, what are you going to do? And I actually started, I'm just now remembering this. I started doing this with some of my athletes after discussing the same thing with a MMA coach. And,
yeah.
And he would have his fighters do that. He'd be like, okay, you're in so-and-so's guillotine. What are you going to do? Like just when they're like sitting around, like talking about it. And
based
the way
off
that
of what the other person is doing too, which is pretty. I work with an MMA fighter as well, so it's fascinating how it's different and how you can pull from that.
Yeah, but I guess my point with that is this coach was describing the same exercise to me.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you going to do? You're caught in so-and-so's guillotine.
Yep.
Or sitting here, chair to chair. Like, how do you actually get out? And he said the fighter would he'd describe all these things that are going on. First, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. And then the coach would cue him, okay, I'm going to be calm. I'm going to remain. I'm going to, keep
even
breathing.
Though you're in
I know I can.
This high anxiety kind of situation, you're going to relax into it. And
100%.
get into be able to pull out that you're connected and present.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get out if you're thinking about what we do next. You got to be fully invested in what to do right this second.
Right. And so the scene that I was trying to paint here is this coach is describing this exercise with this athlete, and he was saying that the athlete was actually kind of partially going through the motions and the angles and the movements that he would do if he were actually in that situation. So it also became not only a psychological activity, but a kinesthetic activity as well, because he was there are more senses involved.
Yep.
And I've noticed that as well when I take my athletes through this situation, that they start to almost pantomime what they would do if they were caught. Okay, if I get lost, I'm going to turn around, and they actually turn around,
right?
To to actually as if they were actually
visualization. So either you can see yourself through a move, you're the real, and you see yourself, or you see yourself in it, you're the blind, from your eyeballs, right? Versus watching a movie of yourself, you could visualize like that. It's one way to visualize, and another way is to actually just be doing it as if you're in that moment. And both ways are great. Sometimes it's good to lay in bed and just think about, okay, this is everything I'm gonna go right, and then I'm just gonna remind myself that to be more aware if I feel in my head that I might be getting lost, that intuition, right? Especially I think for long distance running and ultra mountain biking and all these things, you have to really rely on your ethos of just kind of, being more, in a way, I almost feel like if you're doing the sport, you already kind of have a meditation and mindfulness.
Because you're doing the sport.
And so I work from that, because it's you wouldn't choose to do that sport if it wasn't you being able to be present in the moment, because you just wouldn't be able to access that length of duration. Yep. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep. So that's the first thing is this role playing or the scenario playing. What are you going to do when the shit hits the fan?
Yeah, because it's going to happen at some point.
Because it is, and it's not never, but sometimes it is the situation. Yeah,
it's just part of what you're choosing to do. So I tell people, it's you're going to get a mechanical and mountain biking and have to pit.
Right.
So if you can't just be okay with that and freak out every time you have to pit, then we're going to have issues.
Right. And irrespective of how close the artificially generated scenario is to the real one that actually happens, the skill sets can still translate. So I encourage all the athletes that are out there that are thinking about this in their, they might be preparing for a big race. Think about what you're going to do when the shit hits the fan, because ultra running, there's a lot of that going on.
It's easy to picture us. Well, I even have athletes that can't picture themselves winning. That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to kind of peel back is how do you instruct your support crew? And when I ask athletes this, inevitably it revolves around driving directions and the gear that they need.
Yeah.
I need them to turn left at the stop sign and get to this aid station by 8:42 a.m.
Right.
And I'm going to need the pink jacket. And I'm okay, well,
but what can they be saying to
you?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. And having signs and, humor is a big one. Having funny shit, that your wife knows about you, that she's gonna have friends on the course yell at you, that you don't even may not even know, but since I'm not talking to the wife and everyone, I get the athletes to tell the people that are going to be in their support crew what they need, but also what they're going to need mentally, what to say when I look like I'm in like not a good place. You know, what level of energy do they need to be at? And then when I'm winning or whatever, what would be a good thing and energy to have when, you know, that I need to keep just like, you know, annihilating or whatever, right? So that's a huge part of it, is like at your ultra running or ultra marathon riding, or, you know, the biking or whatever you're doing, is having a support crew, but also just what are they saying? You know, are they going to be holding, you know, a piece of paper up with, you know, your cue words is a big thing. So with runners or mountain bikers, I'll sometimes have them do like words that get them back into the present. When they start to go into like panic mode, or this really hurts, you know, and it could be breathe, or it could be like push through the bullshit, or I mean, I don't know, like kill bitches, right? It can be all these, whatever you need to get hype. But it's funny because a lot of, you know, my athletes really just, instead of being hyped, they need to be grounded and centered for optimal performance.
Yeah,
calm.
and we see this. It's so funny that you mentioned that. We see this in ultra running, where an athlete has not done this prior proper preparation with their crew.
Yep.
And inform them, hey, this is the energy I want you to have. These are the things I want you to say. If I'm high, do this. If I'm low, do this. If I'm doing great, you know, tell me this.
Totally.
They haven't gone through that.
No.
And inevitably...
It's huge. It's huge.
It's huge. And inevitably, the way that manifests itself actually out on the race course is there's this energy mismatch between the runner coming into the aid station and their crew. So the runner comes in, and the crew, they want to help. I mean, that's you know, it's in their nature, right. And they think that the default way to help is to be over enthusiastic and yelling and screaming and things like that. When in some cases, in reality,
it's just don't say anything. Don't just give me X, Y. Be robotic.
Exactly.
Do.
Exactly.
Yep. Being vanilla.
The other part of that is then you can watch the athlete leave the aid station, and it's like they ran another 3 miles because of all of the energy that it took to like manage whatever energy or lack thereof the crew was throwing at them.
Exactly. And so a lot of times it's like be vanilla, but then when the athlete is leaving, then that's when you can cheer, yell, whatever, like, you know, as they're getting out and going, you know. So I had it really be significant with my downhill racers. They're mechanics.
Right. So what do you have their mechanics do? Like do you just have them like...
No, I have like the mechanics will go live with the athlete.
Oh, just to get to know them.
Really get to know each other. It's like your bestie now, you know? So, I mean, that's why a lot of good athletes will have the same mechanic their entire life. It's like a coach.
Yeah, exactly. I did this, it is a little bit of a personal anecdote. I did this really cool, 300 kilometer race over in Italy called the Tour de Géants.
Okay.
And it was this thing, it was like completely outside of anything that I've ever done. It was going to take me 4 or 5 days and, you know, on and on and on and on and on. And my wife was going to be my crew, which, you know, as you probably recognize, that could be a blessing or a curse, right?
The wife is typically, the wife or husband.
Yeah. they can either have like too much sympathy or you're worried about them the whole time. But anyway, it could go good or bad.
Yeah, you're worried about them. That's another piece, right?
So I was going through, okay, what do I want? My wife's name is Liz, and I've mentioned her a few times on this podcast, so she doesn't mind. So I was internally going through, okay, how am I going to like coach Liz on this whole thing? Right. And I one of the things that was intriguing about this race is it was so much unknown for me. Like I hadn't done a 6-day stage race or anything like that. I'd done something that lasts 30 hours, certainly not anything that's 4 days. So I don't really know like how I'm going to react after day 3 or 4 or 5 or anything like that.
Just hormonally, like your energy between the stages.
So I didn't want to guess. So the only thing I told her, like from the psychological perspective, is I'm not quitting unless I've got a bone sticking out.
Yes. Okay.
So
that's
just
exactly
don't,
what sounds like me.
Just don't let me,
don't let me quit.
Don't let me quit. Like, I don't, I didn't want to predict like, okay, if I'm in a good mood, I want you to do this. If I'm in a bad mood, because I don't know. I didn't know. Yeah. So I like boiled it down to like the simplest objective.
If I'm, walking, crawling, if I still can do it, you're kicking my ass to go to the start line.
100%. So needless to say, I think the second piece that I really wanted to drive home with the listeners is like, coach your crew on how you want them to like manage their energy, balance 100%. Off of your energy and things like that.
Yep. And again, that's taking that ownership, the wheel. Mm-hmm. And know that no matter what, I say this all the time, no matter what, you're driving this engine, no matter what against your team, like your team director or the bike company or whatever, you're a human being. For optimal performance, you've got to stand up, and you got to ask and work towards getting what you need, get your needs met. And I think that's just that empowerment, across genders.
Yep, 100%.
And races.
Yep.
And stuff.
Yep.
It's what we're learning in the world today. I'm very, very, very honored and lucky that I got my education at like one of the best universities for multiculturalism being taught and emphasized in all of our education clinically and as a sports psych. And so, though a lot of the different sports that I do work with are going to, be a lot more of a white dominance, I still work with women, and we still have a long ways to go with, women and outside of sport. So why do we think it's going to be any different in sport? And the same for mental health.
Yep.
If something outside of sport is an issue, it's only going to be like on fire, exasperated within like a smaller culture.
Yep, totally.
And that goes across any sport.
I totally agree with that. We see it in trail running as well. The last area that I wanted to get your take on, Kristin, this is going to seem like a totally shameless plug, but I think one of the themes that has emerged throughout this podcast, this is like, hey, if you think an athlete's a good fit, they're a good fit. If they're not a good fit, they're not a good fit. I mean, you're really open about that it's a athlete first mentality that you have. But a lot of athletes are gonna listen to this and go, okay, how do I know? Or what are some like telltale signs that I can use that would demonstrate to me that sports psychology would help me up my game? I mean, as a coach, when I'm working with an athlete on a day-to-day basis, like I don't say I get it right all the time, because I never get it right all the time, but I can kind of tease that out where I reach the limit of my capabilities in that area, and I say, listen, it's going to be in your best interest. Let's get you with somebody like yourself or some of my other colleagues that I work with. But for the athletes that are out there that don't work with coaches or want to like take it on their own accord, like how do they suss that out?
I think I want to get to a point where no matter what, if you are a coached athlete and you're a weekend warrior or trying to win worlds and go to worlds or age group or whatever, that you would at least maybe have a few sessions with a sports psychologist that could help you figure out what you need. We're not there yet, but I think that, I would invite that you don't have to be world class. You don't have to be whatever. I want you to be I will have a conversation with a world class athlete, like world champion level athlete, I should say, because everyone's world class in my book. And then I'll have a conversation with an athlete who hasn't raced in like 5 years, but still wanted to like work with me because they're in grad school or whatever, right? And I'm having the same conversations. Mm-hmm. So it's really little about what people would maybe put under the umbrella of psych. And with my top level athletes, I'm not teaching them. They got themselves there. I didn't. Their coach didn't either. They got themselves there, right? So I just think it's if it sounds cool, if you're like, oh my God, like it's not about just sport. I can help. Working with most, I would say, to plug myself in a healthy way, is I'm helping you as a human. And if you're struggling in an area or not struggling, or just think, hey, I want to be a better version of myself, which I know will help my sport, then heck yeah, go talk to someone. It's not, that's a good thing. It's like, most people, when you get on insurance, you find a PCP. I want to live in a world where you find a PCP and a psychologist. That doesn't mean you talk to them every week. Maybe you just have a check in with them once a month. You know, so don't be afraid. Like, break the mold. Let's normalize mental health, because sports performance high performance is part of mental health. That's how I look at it.
Yep. That's a great place to leave it, Kristin. I really appreciated your perspective on that.
Great questions.
First off, thank you for coming on the podcast, and also thank you for doing that continuing ed with our coaches. I'm really appreciative of that. Where can people go and find you to learn a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, so I do need to update my website because I usually put on my podcasts.
We're the worst.
Oh God, I'm so bad. And then I can't remember. Then I'm like, I know I did a podcast. Where do I find that one? You know, like go look myself up and Google myself. And I'm like, oh my God, I feel so that's where I have my own issues. I'm like, oh my God, I feel so weird doing this, to find the articles that I've done or, whatever. So my podcasts that I've done and all that are on my website. Any articles I've ever written or contributed to, I've helped with some, sport and depression ones with some really amazing journalists like Bonnie Ford and stuff. So those are all there on all kinds of a wide range of topics of sports performance and mental health. And that's performanceconsulting.com. Very easy. And you on that website can find how to contact me. Most people will just go through my website, which is, what I prefer. And then on social media, I am at the K2, which the short story about that is that I had a coach. I was kind of a climber when I was racing, and Mount K2, it's one of the highest peaks, and Kristin Keim squared. So it was kind of this thing. And that was the early 2000s, and it stuck. And so when I was trying to be graduating and I got my doctorate, and I was like, oh my God, I need to change that. And I polled everyone, and they were like, no, do not change it. It's perfect. It fits you. Yeah. You're not like the norm. You kind of go against the norm of just trying to break that, I'm just me. Be authentic. Just this isn't something I'm not Freud. I'm not going to sit on a couch and, shame you or guilt you. It's we're just going to have a chat. I'm going to find out your strengths, and we're going to make you help yourself be a better version of yourself. And who doesn't want that?
Everybody does.
So at the K2 for Twitter, Instagram, and then Keim Performance Consulting on LinkedIn. I don't really do anything on LinkedIn, but I'm also there.
Go give Kristin a follow on Instagram, because I know that whenever I need to bring my heart rate down 5 or 10 beats, if I'm getting all riled up about something, I can go to Kristin's Instagram feed and it will instantly calm me down and get me recentered. So
that's kind of my goal.
Yeah.
So it gave me goosebumps just there, because I can be high energy. Don't worry, I can help people up, but most of us in today's world just need to be a breath of fresh air, something that's just, calming and centering. And that's kind of what I think that's all what we all need right now. So podcasts are a great way. I love your podcast. I think you have really great information, and, so I just encourage people to, diversify, follow some coaches and some people outside of your sport. I would say that to every sport,
Appreciate that, Kristin. Yeah, Kristin, I appreciate the kind words there. Everybody go give Kristin a follow. She's a fantastic human being, as well as really killer sports psych person and a really good athlete as well. Kristin, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
And there we have it. Thanks, folks. Thank you to Kristin for coming on the podcast today. That was really fun. I hope everybody left this podcast with some mental tools that you can put into your toolbox, things that will make you a better ultra runner. Thanks to all of you for listening. Really appreciate the heck out of each and every one of you listeners. I appreciate all the feedback that I've gotten in this podcast so far. Very early in the game, but I'm very appreciative of everything that I've received on social media, and also a lot of the reviews that I've seen on Apple Podcasts. Big shout out to Mike Carson for all of the post-production editing and audio engineering for this podcast, as well as the rest of the podcasts in this lineup. We'll see you guys out on the trails, people.